Greetings, nerds. While I am home for a brief while before I set off on my next adventure, I would like to show off a little bit of what we've been doing with the Valinor faction. I believe this will be the first battle replay that I've shown, or anyone for that matter has shown, with the Valinor faction. Now, we did have a little bit of a rough showing on stream where Valinor got savagely beat down, but that is mostly due to my incompetence, and I aim to ameliorate any preconceptions that you may have regarding the faction in the next few days before I leave on Wednesday, I believe it is. So yeah, without any further ado, let's get into this replay. It is a 2v2 on the Dimbar map, and we're going to be playing against Valinor. I've got an interesting assortment of factions here. Chiefly the House of Feanor and the House of Fingolfin. So Team Red and Blue banding together against the other bigger brother, Finarfin and his Noldor and so forth. So I have brought a couple of units here of the Riders of the Pass, and the idea behind this is that I want to pick on some of the lighter Valinor units. There are a number of Teleran horse archers, the shoal runners, who are fairly easy prey for the Riders of the Pass, but also the Wild Riders get quite seriously countered by horse archers on the field. Now, Valinor has lots of means of preventing me from getting close to them, shoal hunters and shoal runners and so forth. However, pardon me, clearing my throat. However, if I can get near the Wild Riders with the Riders of the Pass, I can chew their HP up quite neatly. I've also brought mounted company of Curufin. This is kind of my ace in the hole when it comes to playing as the Feanor faction. I brought 3 of these heavy melee cavalry. They're also armed with some harassment javelins, and that is going to be really nice for bullying the Teleri, believe it or not, because from the front at least, and especially with that armor upgrade, these units are incredibly efficient. So I can bully the Teleri out of position all I want, and they also hold their own pretty well against the other Valinor cavalry options, those being the Wild Riders and the Knights of Tirion. So, really important unit. Gotta make sure I get good value out of them. I've also brought 2 units of the Heavy Lancers here, the Hunters of Caligorm. Potentially a very devastating unit. They are a little bit slower being Heavy Lancers, however they have far and away the best charge bonus of any cavalry unit in the game. It is of course armor piercing, so on the charge, and especially against the right units, these are absolutely devastating, basically war crime engines. So hopefully we get to see a little bit of that on the field today, and I've got, as I mentioned, 2 of them. So that's like 7 cavalry in total. It'll be an interesting game. The anvil to my hammer is going to consist of 3 units of the Footmen of Amras. I brought them with Valinor in mind, in that they do not have a lot of strong armor-piercing options. The only ones that they do have are Spearmen, so the Vanyar, they are armor-piercing, and the Shoal Hunters, when they are in close combat only, and they don't tend to do particularly well in close combat. It's really more of a supporting unit that gets most of its value from being a skirmisher. So not a ton of great options there until they get one of their Maiar bodyguards, which they do not currently have. So bringing 3 of them, it's going to take even the mighty Sentinels of Tirion quite a while to chunk their way through 16 armor and 10 shield value. In behind, I've opted to bring an interesting core of skirmishers. I've got 3 units of the Rangers of Hellevoord. These are Hunter Javelins, and for the uninitiated, that means they hit things real hard. We have Harassment Javelins, which are great for dealing damage sustained from a distance, whereas the Hunter Javelins are good for that burst damage, popping it off against an elephant or a heavily armored target, bodyguards, etc., much like the Finarfin Noldor or the Vanyar, and that's why I've brought them here today. I'm going to try and pick on as many of those heavy units as possible, and these guys can be incredibly efficient against them. I've also brought, for a little bit of support, 2 units of the Shield Bearers of Hellevorn, warriors from the House of Beor. They're really just here to try and soak up a little bit of damage, or maybe to provide a little bit of extra support against cavalry on the wings. They've also got their armor upgrade, which you can't really tell because there's no cosmetic change, but eventually there will be. And that is going to help them deal with the Shoal Hunters. I believe that gives them about 9 armor and like 7 or 8 shield value or something. So the Shoal Hunter damage will hopefully be mitigated somewhat by these Shield Bearers of Hellevorn. And that's basically it. My general is actually in one of these. Did I say I brought 3 units of footmen? I actually brought 4. My general's going to be hanging out in one of these footmen, so I don't have the conventional general's bodyguard pick. Instead, I spent that extra money on a 3rd unit of the Rangers of Helleborn. So that's going to do for me. let's go ahead and check on my ally here, Bilbo T. Baggins, which sounds a little bit unfortunate. He is actually the creator of a submod for Third Age Reforged, and I'm going to put a link for his channel down in my description. He's also a member of the Silmarillion Total War team as one of our mod helpers, so he's extremely nice. He's been very helpful for the team, and also has his own mod, so go and check that out when you guys have a moment. But in any case, he's brought 3 units of the Herdsmen of Hithlum, I believe with the explicit purpose of dealing with the Shoal Hunters, because they are very scary, and you're going to see a ton of them, and the damage that they can do in this particular battle. So, moving on now, we've got 3 units of the Herdsmen. Arm-piercing axe is always a nice thing to have. 2 units of the Marines of Vinyamar as well. And we've got a whole bunch of sentries. Now, we've had some interesting changes to pike units generally, in that they do have now an innate shield bonus, so protection against missiles and melee attacks from the front, just to further represent, having a bunch of sticks waving around in the air. Could potentially block a little bit of missiles, but it also does have the benefit of increasing the survivability of this infantry unit against incoming missile fire, and there's going to be a lot more, I think, interesting dynamics in terms of the amount of missiles that you have available and the sort of interaction between skirmishers and infantry, in particular foot skirmishers. So infantry are getting a little bit more survivable. Pikes have also had their numbers increased ever so slightly, and you're going to see a lot of mid-tier units like this actually go down in price by about 10 or so percent, between 8 and 10%, depending on the unit, using my judgment on that. So you're going to be seeing a lot more mid-tiers, and you're going to be seeing a fair amount more skirmishers, in particular foot skirmishers. And then there will possibly be some changes to cavalry, maybe the odd extra cavalry unit being added here and there, but there are 3 new ones coming in with Valinor. But in any case, something to look forward to for the next patch. I believe he's got 3 or 4 units of them in total, and there's a whole lot more of them, so they're going to be particularly important in this battle. Next we have the Arimo Arantad, which is going to function as the general's bodyguard. This is of course Fingolfin's personal guard, and you can see them right there. So we're going to go ahead and turn down the speed here, just so we don't miss anything. This army is predominantly Edain, which isn't something that you see very often from the House of Fingolfin, so most of the Noldor units are going to be supporting. So Arimo Arantad is the bodyguard, some Armatar, and some Herumatar of Barad Ithel. So these elite elven swordsmen here, I believe there's 3 units of, and their morale boosting capabilities are going to be particularly useful for keeping a lot of these mid-tier units in line, like the Ferdsmen of Dorloman. There's going to be at least 4 of them here. We've also got some Sons of Húrin, armor-piercing, very, very deadly, probably one of the scariest close combat units in the game. And just as a fun little detail, you can see Húrin himself wearing his famous dragon helm. Yes, I know he didn't actually wear it in the books. Túrin did, more than anybody. But it's just a cool little reference, so Húrin is there leading his quote-unquote sons into battle. Next we have the Legendary Company. These are a skirmish and more lightly armored variant of the Lancers of Anan-in-Galuth, and they're also unshielded, but they do have some armor-piercing arrows and really good bonuses against elephants in close combat, but they also have high melee defense, which is particularly nice when you throw them into battle against archers. Now, another big change that is coming in this patch is that all non-elite archers and potentially foot skirmishers generally are going to have a -1 penalty against cavalry. So your cavalry will be extra good against them, and that will help, I hope, give cavalry more of an active role and also keep skirmishers from overrunning everything and becoming a skirmish meta, which obviously I don't want. We have a detachment of the Ferdsmen here as well, and we've also got some Lancers of Anan-in-Galuth, so the regular sort of non-special quote-unquote variant of the cavalry that we just saw. Light Lance, actually medium Lancers, and they hit like a train off the charge, as you would, of course, expect them to. And that's going to do for our army. So we're going to pop across the field here, take a look at the 2 Valinor factions. There's going to be some familiar faces here, particularly Scouts of Entertainment. Now, this is a game that we did on stream together, so if you guys have already seen this, don't give it away. Don't tell anybody down in the comment section. But yeah, fair warning. But for those of you that haven't seen it, it is a damn fine, very close battle with 2 Valinor players on the field. So Scouts is going to be bringing some Wild Riders of Orome. He's got 1 unit of them here. These units are particularly quick, they can hide anywhere, and they're very good at fighting elephant class units and wargs. What they are not so great at is fighting units that are riding horses, so horsemen. They do have some pretty substantial penalties against horsemen, so that is something to watch out for. And of course, they are a spear unit. They are technically spear cavalry, so they do have penalties when fighting against infantry in a sustained melee. So you want to cycle charge them, or you want to get them stuck on some elephants where they can do fabulous for you. Over here, we have some Knights of Tyrion, some absolutely gorgeous models here. These represent the Noldor of Finarfin, is he the third brother? He would be the third brother of the great King Finwë, the first High King of the Noldor. And he and his people repented of the journey, or rather the flight of the Noldor from Valinor to Middle-earth after seeing the terrible fruits of the Oath of Feanor and the first Kinsley. So they repented, returned to Valinor, but they were just a shadow of the former size of the great people that once lived there. So we have one of them here today. They are particularly good at fighting horsemen. They're sort of the alter ego to the Wild Riders of Orome. Obviously, they are much more heavily armored. It looks like we have a second company of the Wild Riders as well. Something else that we want to keep an eye on. Scouts is also going to be bringing some Vanyar spearmen. You can see them all here. And in behind them, there are some Teleran skirmishers, the sentries of Alcolonde. A whole bunch of them. So we've got some Plaza Guardians here of Valimar as well, so the two-handed spear variant of the Peacekeepers. They are all armor-piercing, and they have slashing damage, so they're particularly good against infantry. They're basically, for all intents and purposes, a halberd. Next we have the Hearthguard of Tyrion, who are a dismounted unit, being led by one of the kinsmen of Ingwe, the High King. And, yeah, have very heavily armored. You can actually upgrade their armor twice to give them, I think, 14 armor in total, which is, of course, very, very scary. They've got some solid shield and melee defense stats to match. There's obviously not very many of them, and they are quite expensive. In behind them, we have the Shoal Hunters, the Shoal Hunters of Alcolonde. The thing that makes them particularly interesting as slingers is that they don't have armor piercing, but they do have what we are calling the shield breaker trait. It does allow them to ignore half of shield value from the front, and they actually have a split projectile, which I realize is absurd. But it does add a little bit of flavor to these units, and they are particularly scary. They're also led by one of the Grieving Sons and several other Teleran units. So, they're all these factions are led by their own officers, with the exception of the Kinsmen of Ingwe, but eventually these guys will get their own officer as well. But yeah, Shoal Hunters, there's a crap ton of them. I think he's got 3 in total in his army. Got some Sentinels of Tyrion here, the two-handed variant of the other units that we've seen. They hit like trains, not something that you want to underestimate. Over here we have the Kinsmen of Ingwe. These are actually Vanyar, and you can't really see it close up, but if you look very closely, you'll find that all of the Elven kindreds have some sort of distinguishing feature. In the case of the Vanyar, they are very fair-haired to the point of having white or like a silvery golden hair. And they also have purple eyes. Why do they have purple eyes? Because I thought it looked cool. There's literally no lore reason for it, so there's no need to tell me, wow, the Vanyar, it's not written that they have purple eyes. I know, it's just cool. In behind them, you can see Eonwe, the Herald of the Valar. This is actually not his final model. We have an updated variant of it done by White in the Black Cloud, so you'll see that in some future updates, probably in the next one. And then in behind them, we've got some Shoal Hunters here of Alcolonde. So we've got Peacekeepers of Valimar over here as well. And I think we're starting to get into the other army. And that one is going to be commanded by Artorias. And he's brought a crap ton of skirmishers. He's brought a ton of the Sentries of Alcolonde. Looks like there's about 4 to 5 units of them right there. And I believe he's also got around 4 to 5 units of the Shoal Hunters, and a ton of Teleran Mariners and Swan Guard to back up his main line. So the Mariners of Alcolonde are a supporting unit, but they're also like a light infantry hybrid. They are meant to be harassment javelins, but currently they're lacking their armor piercing. However, they can be used to great effect against many other light targets, and they will be getting that EP eventually. In behind them, we have some more Shoal Hunters. And then over here, a whole ton of Shoal Runners. 1, 2, 3, 4. But they're going to get stalked a little bit here by some of my cavalry. More Shoal Runners over here as well. Light Skirmish Cav. Not something that you want to underestimate. And they can be brought in fairly high numbers. And they're also very cheap, so they're quite expendable. I believe he's also got some of his own hidden cavalry over here. He's got the Knights of Tyrion. It looks like Eonwe is going to be leading this particular regiment. A clone of Eonwe, or perhaps a very big fan of his within the ranks of the Maiar. He's got a real good death stare on him. That might be the real one. I think he's got a couple units of the Wild Riders hiding over here as well. So a ton of skirmishers, not quite so many heavy infantry for the front lines, but it looks like Scouts of Entertainment is going to be taking care of that. And I believe Artorius also has some of his own Vanyar and things like that. I know we definitely saw some of them. Yeah, we've got some Peacekeepers there. Some more Peacekeepers in behind. These are all 2 HP units, so very, very scary, with the exception of the Teleri, who don't have the 2 HP. But anything that's not Teleran has 2 HP, and something you want to be afraid of. So that's going to do it for this, for the army compositions, rather, and let's go ahead and jump into the battle. Alright, so the game kicks off, and we can see one of the Valinor players moving to combine his forces with the other Valinor player. And this is particularly dangerous when you're facing Valinor, because in a close combat situation, they are extremely powerful. You need to be able to wear them down, or at least wear out some of the numbers of the Teleri in order to isolate some of the smaller and more elite units like the Noldar and Vanyar before engaging them in close quarters. Otherwise, it's just too overwhelming, and they will just outright beat most factions in the game in that sort of ideal set of circumstances. And when we're playing as Fingolfin and Feanor, we don't exactly have a ton of ranged power on our side in this matchup. So we're we need to be aware of that. So I'm going to move forward with some of my cavalry. I'm not really sure what I'm going to go for. This is really just opportunism, just trying to be aggressive, trying to see what opportunities present themselves, and then jumping on them and capitalizing as best as I am able. So we're going to be shooting here into some of the Peacekeepers, as they do have their backs turned to us, and they only have about 7 armor. And our Horse Archers also have about 7 armor. They're going to be leading the way, and our melee cavalry are going to be following that up. Now, if I can, I want to get within 100 meters of these shoal runners. They are lightly armored. They don't have any significant shield value, so our harassment javelins are actually going to do a fair amount of damage to them. And you're going to see that right here. We have managed to kind of close in on them a little bit. We're able to launch some of those jabbies off. And it does do a fair amount of damage. You'll see quite a lot of those unicorns now beginning to die off. I'm going to drop pretty quickly down to, I think, about 55, 56, maybe even as low as 50. So shaved off a significant amount of models from actually 2 units here. Yeah, they're now down to 49 from 60. So that's just a couple of volleys. So I'm going to continue to move forward with my mounted company, bully them out of position. I noticed that they don't have any of their supporting units nearby, and it seems as though maybe Artorius has gone quite heavy into the skirmish cavalry and not a lot of melee cavalry or anti-monster cavalry on his side. That being said, he does of course have his general unit, but he probably doesn't want to get them involved in close quarters with 3 units mounted company because they will of course be overwhelmed. That being said, Scouts does have a decent amount of cavalry in the area, but he probably doesn't want to get too close to all of this cav here, as those harassment javelins, while we still have ammo remaining, can be a bit of a pain. So over here we're going to manage to catch out one of the shoal runners. Actually going to kill some of my own units there with some careless friendly fires. A little bit of an oops on my part. I was kind of hoping that they would shoot at these shoal runners, but apparently I didn't click hard enough. So the shoal runners here are basically going to be destroyed. And we're actually going to get pretty close to catching another one of these units. We're going to be like right up in their grill, tossing those javelins at basically point blank. And a lot of those shoal runners are going to die off. We're going to manage to get enough of these models in combat. And this, I believe, is where they kind of turn around. No, perhaps not in this case. But if you can, generally in Medieval 2, get enough models in a unit in combat, they will turn around and rush into melee. So that can be a little bit frustrating for players on the other end of that, but that's just sort of how the AI seems to work. So that's what I'm trying to do here, managing to kill off about a third of that unit of shoal runners, and they are kind of exposed. We've managed to basically separate them from the rest of the herd, and now we're going to pounce on them like so many wolves. So 40 of them down there. I'm able to just kind of push forward, and of course I have a little bit of support up here as well. So if they turn around, or if any other cavalry comes over this way, and it looks like some of the shoal runners will double back, we're going to be able to bring our mounted company out here onto this hill, and we're going to rain down death and destruction. Looks like that's exactly what Artorias tends to do here. The other two remaining units of shoal runners moving forward, trying to get in behind. He's going to sack this unit here and then try and get behind my troops, but I will turn them around. And so the damage here isn't going to be nearly as bad, but we will take some minor casualties so far. But that does really work out quite nicely for us. We've basically managed to neutralize 2 units of shoal runners here, and we're going to take a nice little bite out of a third. So our harassment javelins up there on that hill. These the mounted company here, and these kind of like heavily armored melee cavalry that also have missile attacks. There's not very many of them in the mod, but they are extremely potent hard counters to horse archers, and this sort of thing. Yeah, we're gonna pursue pretty close, but I don't want to get that close. You know, there's a lot of Hearthguard over here. Some of those shoal hunters, they were already turning around and beginning to fire. I don't want to get hit by them, so I'm gonna pull my mounted company out of there ASAP. And I'm gonna move to finish off the second company here of the shoal runners. Pardon me, and that's going to be basically all she wrote for them. So 2 units dead, a decent amount of ammunition taken up, and we managed to weaken some of the other shoal runners minorly. But now the big boys have arrived on field. 2 units of the Wild Riders and Scouts Knights of Tyrion. I don't want none of that because I don't want to lose my mounted company. I think that they would do pretty well. But the second that Scouts kind of sees that I've still got ammunition remaining, he is going to turn around and beat feet in the other direction, which is probably a good idea. You don't generally want to chase mounted company because, despite being heavy cavalry, one of the specialties of Valinor is that their cavalry is a little bit quicker than other people's. So even with the swift of foot elks that they're riding, they probably wouldn't be able to catch up to my mounted company before they took a undue amount of casualties or HP loss from trying to hunt them down. And there's enough of them that, you know, it wouldn't exactly be the easiest fight. In the meanwhile, got my Riders of the Pass moving forward. I can see sort of what's happening here in that they're starting to set up on our front lines. And I don't want my cavalry to be just isolated in the back, but I also don't want to give up the positional advantage that having cavalry behind somebody's lines gives you. And there's also a little bit of a psychological element to it. People are a little bit more hesitant to commit everything all at once when there are enemies behind them. Even if by committing to a frontal engagement with the rest of our army, they would probably beat us. It does add that little bit of sort of mind games to it. So I didn't really want to give that up, so they're going to be behind there for a little while. Artorias moving forward with the first line of skirmishing, a whole bunch of Mariners of Alcolonde. And there's actually some good targets for them here. So despite the fact that there's a little bit of an error in the EDU that doesn't give the Mariners of Alcolonde their AP on the Javelin, these units here of Herdsmen of Hithlum are actually prime targets. They've only got about 5 armor or so anyway, and they obviously don't have shields. So they're going to be easy prey for those javelins. A good opportunity to get a lot of value out of them, because the Herdsmen of Hithlum are extremely useful, high damage armor-piercing units after the fact. And so losing them in that way is obviously not a good thing. Scouts are trying to be a little bit opportunistic here with the Wild Riders of Orome, moving forward against the Herdsmen of Hithlum. I don't know if they're going to get away. They might. There's a whole bunch of arrow fire coming in. They are going to manage to make contact here, but because these units are moving in the opposite direction, it's actually not going to be the worst. And then the second company here is going to have their charge a little bit interrupted. And now Bilbo is making them pay mightily with some Marines of Vinyamar and some reserve units of Herdsmen of Hithlum. So his Wild Riders actually on the verge of routing here, taking a whole bunch of damage really quickly, losing a little over a third of the unit, nearly half. And the Mariners of Alcolonde are going to take this opportunity to move in now, and you can see the carnage that they can cause with those javelins against these relatively lightly armored. They are about medium tier in terms of their armor value, but it really does make a difference there with all of that volume of fire. The Herdsmen taking quite a lot of losses, so fairly even on both sides. We're a little bit ahead thanks to catching those shoal runners out, but really it's nothing that the Valinor players can't afford to lose at this point. Whole bunch of sentries and stuff in behind the lines. I'm trying to maneuver my troops in behind the Valinor troops, but also in an area where we can support our wings if that is indeed what we need to be able to do. Just trying to keep them out of bowshot with varying levels of success. There's a little bit of damage that's been done to these troops from those arrows, but they are quite heavily armored and heavily shielded, so they're really doing just fine. Shoal runners and other things in the area trying to keep us at bay, but really it's the threat of spears and some of the additional cavalry that's preventing me from kind of diving in on these shoal runners. And I also don't want to isolate my cavalry. I mean, maybe I could get in here and get a bunch of shoal runners, but Artorias and scouts would be able to react to that fairly quickly and shut that down. It wouldn't really be the decisive moment that I need it to be, and it's very likely that I would lose my cavalry. So we're not going to be quite as aggressive in this instance. We're going to instead, just hold our peace for a little while. Earlier I was using my horse archers to kind of skirmish a little bit with some of these Valinor troops. I think we got like right up to the Plaza Guardians and unloaded a couple of volleys in their face, but we were ultimately driven back by skirmish fire. And you can see some of my dead horsemen here, especially over here. That's where my Riders of the Past really took a beating. So I pulled them out of there, and now I've reassembled the majority of my cavalry wing over here behind the Valinorians on their left wing, and we'll see kind of what happens here. So more early aggression here. The Lances of Anonin Galuth getting a wonderful charge here against the Mariners of Alcalonde. It's gonna hurt, but Scouts is gonna be on top of it, and Artorias as well with some of his own wild riders. Oof, that's a hard one. And Knights of Tyrion in here as well. And those Lances of Anonin Galuth are basically gonna break immediately from all of the skirmish fire coming their way. And now things are getting really ugly. The Shoal Hunters opening up here on the Herdsmen. Herdsmen are taking terrible, terrible damage. And these Herdsmen here as well. They're going to want to be drawn back behind the lines. Not a good place for them to be now that the Shoal Hunters are out here, and just waves upon waves of javelins and sling fire. Everything just coming in here. Hopefully Bilbo Baggins pulls these Herdsmen of Hithlum back behind his line, because there's really no good reason for them to be out here at the moment. They're out of ammunition, and they're not ready to kind of just dive in to the front of that line. So they're just sitting ducks out here, so I hope that he pulls them back soon. Herdsmen of Dorlomin and a whole bunch of other things are going to be able to take that fire a little bit better than the Herdsmen. So hopefully we see them make it back behind the line. Sentries are also being drawn back as well, which is quite a wise decision, I feel. The sentries in particular would be easy prey for the Shoal Hunters. And so Bilbo has all the Herdsmen out here, and Artorias is just going to unload into them. Mariners of Alcalonde out front, a couple of Shoal Hunters here, one from Scouts, one from Artorias as well. And they're just gonna, they're gonna vent their fury upon the Herdsmen. They're definitely going after the Herdsmen. They managed to take down about 20 or so models before Bilbo was able to retreat them. And that's really just going to leave this front line here exposed to a lot of skirmish fire. But honestly, it's not the worst. It's not the worst. These Herdsmen need to be continuously drawn back. That's a big problem right there. But for most of these units, it's not the worst. The Shoal Hunters can be very, very scary against some of the more important elements of Bilbo's army. Not so much against mine, but certainly against my Javelineers. And the more ammo that they use, just kind of picking apart shielded light infantry from the front, the better off I think we're ultimately going to be, because there's so many of these units that we really can't, we just don't have the resources to neutralize them all. So if they're going to sit here and just pour fire into the front of all this light infantry, then they're basically doing our job for us, which is great. Ooh. Yeah, Bilbo needs to be very aware of his positioning here, and I think he's a little lax on that in this particular instance. The Armitar will be just fine, but the Harumatar are going to take terrible losses if left in that fight for as long as, or left within range for as long as they have been. Out front though, got my footmen here. They're doing just fine. They don't care about sling bullets. That's just gonna bounce right off of them. And more of that skirmish fire going in. They actually have a pretty significant advantage now. You can see that it's evened out. About a 6% or so advantage, and that is only going to continue to climb as these Herdsmen continue to take losses. But this is kind of what they're here for. These are like militia tier units, and they're actually eating up a lot of quite valuable resources. And I think they were expecting the focus fire here to just break those units so that they can continuously like push us back and move on to new targets. But the Herdsmen of Dorloman, the men of House Hador, have really proven their worth here today. And they are not going anywhere. Not until pretty well the last man, so well done on their end. Meanwhile, in the back, it's just a lot of kind of testing the waters. I've moved a little bit to a point where I still have access to their flank or potentially to their rear if I want to go the long way round. But now I'm in a much better position to support my allies. And I felt the need to do this after I saw what happened to those Lancers of Anonin Galuth, where they were basically routed almost like forthwith. Like the second that they got in there, there was a million things on top of them, and skirmish fire and all that supporting fire from the Talarian units. And I'm like, well, okay, we're gonna need some help over here, because eventually this is gonna come down to a melee grind. And while we have some options there, and the pikes are incredibly helpful, and there's not too many of the two-handed spears on the field today in order to counter that range advantage that we have, there is still a lot of very fearsome stuff here, a lot of light infantry, and a lot of skirmish fire, and some heavy infantry corps that is not going to be easy for us to deal with. There's a lot of HP to chunk through, so yeah, it's going to come down to that melee grind, and that's where it's going to get really, really, really ugly for both sides. Valinor, I would say, has the edge there, certainly, although they do have a lot of Teleri on the field today. And the Teleri aren't the most sturdy or brave of warriors. They do have good morale, but they don't have the greatest morale response. More of that skirmish fire pouring into the front of these Herdsmen of Dorloman, and this is actually playing out quite nicely. I think in hindsight, it was very intimidating at the time, but now that I come back and look at it, I think this is actually a really important moment where they're just using all of that skirmish fire, trying to get rid of just a couple of cheap units of Herdsmen, and that's honestly, it's a mistake, I feel. This would probably have gone a little bit different if those Mariners had their AP on their missiles, but nonetheless, they are still using a ton of ammunition on just a couple of units of light infantry that only cost together less than 1,000 gold. So, yeah, it's important. There's a lot of dead Herdsmen out here, like a whole lot of dead Edain of House Hador, but ultimately I think that it's not the worst thing. So this is really interesting. So you can see those slings trying to get a piece of the Marines of Vinyamar, and there's not really much of a reason to move them back because of the way that arc actually was. So you can see that most of it's actually going into the footmen of Amaras, who couldn't care less. They'll take that to the face basically all day and only lose like maybe a handful of models. But they just took like 2 or 3 volleys to the face, dead on, and it doesn't matter. And that's probably another big mistake here, is that valuable Shoal Hunter ammunition is being used on units that really it has no business being used on. There's no danger to the footmen of Amaras when they're fully upgraded like this from the front with their shield value. It does have the shield breaker trait, but that only drops the shield down to 5, and when they're fully upgraded like this, they've got about 14 armor. So that far outstrips the 2 damage of those slingers. Now we've got a melee fight here. You can see the Shoal Hunters of Alqualande moving into battle against the Herdsmen, and the other unit of Herdsmen, which was a little more worse for wear, has been just shattered like a broken stick by the Mariners of Alqualande. They ran them right through, and so the second line is going to have to be brought forth. Herdsmen of Dorloman charging in to support their brothers and to exact some revenge upon the hated Teleri, who have done quite a lot of damage to the light Edain wing of this Godolphin army. No doubt they are hungry for vengeance. More javelins coming in. The Herdsmen of Dorloman are going to take that on the chin like the warriors they are. And now I've got some Shield Bearers of Hellevorn over here as well. I'm going to have them just kind of hold position. I don't want to overexpose myself, especially not when there's all those overlapping skirmisher units still yet to come. And it looks like some of the Teleri have broken off. Oh, I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I thought some of the Shoal Hunters had broken, but it would seem not. I'm going to move up with my footmen of Amaras, try to form like a solid line here and force them to commit more, And then I'm going to open up that gap in my line, but I'm going to quickly cover it by shifting all of my troops over. And I've still, of course, got my second line here of Rangers of Hellevorn, and then there's Marines of Vinumar and all of that good stuff. Over here, I got my Rangers of Hellevorn. They're going to be focusing down the Plaza Guardians. This is one of the few polearm units that are in this Valinor army, and I wanted to try and take them out as quickly as possible, especially since they can do a ton, and I mean a ton of AP damage. They are, for all intents and purposes, halberds who also combine the high melee defense strength of a spear unit. So the Valinor are very good, and we're just slowly kind of chunking through that HP. Rangers of Hellevorn now coming under fire from Shoal Hunters. There's some Hearthguard of Tyrion moving up as well, but it's not going to matter too much. We've managed to take down a lot of that HP, and now the models are starting to drop. And I can see that my Rangers of Hellevorn are not having a good time, so I am actually going to pull them back just out of range of the Shoal Hunters. I think they might get one more cheeky volley off before we're able to extricate ourselves from firing range. Over here, though, I'm going to move up my troops. We've got some routing Shoal Hunters. Things are going okay on the front lines. The Valinor army is kind of committing piecemeal a little bit here, and I think that's a function of just not having enough of their really strong infantry. Over here you can see scouts throwing in Sentinels of Tyrion, who are very scary, but my Noldor are going to meet that with Steel and Courage, and because these units aren't armor-piercing, and the footmen are just so efficient in terms of armor and shield value defense from the front, it's actually not going to do a whole lot to them. Even with that javelin support, these javelins aren't armor-piercing, so my footmen not really going to notice it too much. They are going to ultimately lose this fight, but it is going to take quite a while for the Valinor forces to chunk their way through. And the Hearthguard are going to take even longer about it. Some of the Peacekeepers of Valinor are moving in support as well. And now we've got sort of a general engagement here all the way across the line. So I've brought in my mounted company, everything that I have here to try and just pick on the skirmishers. And I notice that there's a big gap here in their line. There's not necessarily a lot of defense. I'm going to throw my Riders of the Pass, who are out of ammunition, into the back of these Teleri. The Teleri don't take morale shocks very well. And Riders of the Pass, even just Riders of the Pass, will do just fine here. Move my mounted company of Kudufin in there, but our horse is going to intercept with some of the Wild Riders. That being said, Wild Riders not the most efficient choice here, and once these guys get in there, they are going to be able to blender those Mariners of Alcalonde, who do lack armor piercing and a whole bunch of other things besides. Mounted company here, kind of just taking shots from the Valinor skirmishers from a distance, but honestly, it's not really worth it. But I am going to take this opportunity here, seeing that there's not a ton of defense, though there are some Peacekeepers of Valinor, which unfortunately I didn't see at the time. I thought that these guys were kind of wide open, so I was going to charge in there with my troops. I think we might manage to take down some of the Peacekeepers, maybe. Yeah, we'll take some of them down. But we really don't want my troops to be in there, and Artorias is going to reinforce with some of the Knights of Tyrion. I'm going to leave these guys in here a little bit too long, just because there's a lot going on elsewhere in the field, but I will throw in some Shield Bearers of Hellevorn as well to try and tie these guys down. And if I can get them in there quick enough, then I can have them support the cavalry, and then maybe allow my cavalry an opportunity to sort of cleanly disengage. And these Shield Bearers here are just taking fire from basically 3 or 4 skirmish units all at once, and I don't even think they're going to make it into close combat. Well, they might. They'll make it in briefly, long enough to tie these guys down and maybe provoke a little bit of friendly fire, but they're going to break almost immediately. These Shield Bearers of Hellevorn will be able to get in there, and that will hopefully allow me to cleanly disengage my cavalry, but we'll come back to that in just a minute here. Over here, Mounted Company doing very well. The Wild Riders of Orome, along with the Mariners of Alcalonde, are just not enough against this Fingolfin front line. We've got the numbers, we have local superiority, and my cavalry is just flat out better. I've got Riders of the Pass in there as well, and they're surprisingly efficient against Wild Riders of Orome. They won't win, but because they are cavalry, they'll put up a fight basically. The Wild Riders are slowly regaining the initiative here, but they've lost over half the unit. Definitely not a very cost-effective trade. And of course, I've got my Mounted Company. Ooh, big car just drove by. I've also got my Mounted Company in here as well, and there's Spearmen and a whole bunch of other things. So Valinor, surprisingly, losing here. Some Kinsmen of Ingwe being committed to the center alongside the Hearthguard of Tyrion and some Peacekeepers of Valimar. And it's fairly even, although I am slowly but surely losing out here to the Sentinels of Tirion. Footman of Amaras. Looks like Artorias is trying to like pepper my reserves, trying to whittle them down, but honestly it's just not a good target. But he's only got so many targets, I suppose. One of the other targets appears to be on Rangers of Hellevorn, but they're actually out of ammunition. And over here, I committed my cavalry. We managed to basically rout off a unit of Plaza Guardians, so they're done for. Wild Riders charging in against my Rangers of Hellevorn, who are trying to use the rest of their ammunition, but there's not enough of them. Even with that Slinger support, the Slingers will run out of ammunition momentarily, and I've got my my Hunters of Caligorm over here. I've managed to clean out a decent amount of cavalry. Some of these shoal runners now engaged in close quarters with my Hunters. Neither of these units are really proficient against cavalry, but my Hunters just have a pure stat advantage over the shoal runners. So the shoal runners will ultimately lose that fight. Now over here, I got my Hunters of Caligorm. Oh, my Rangers of Hellevorn broke under the pressure. And the Mariners are going to basically run them down. They're going to turn around and go the other way. We will get to see them again. They will turn around and begin to fight again. But the Hunters of Caligorm in the meantime are horribly isolated, fighting against some of the Mariners. They're going to do alright because the Mariners don't have armor piercing. But with Knights of Tirion and Peacekeepers of Valinor in close attendance, these heavy lancers need to get out of there as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, on the back here, I managed to extricate my Hunters of Caligorm from a fight with the Shoal Hunters, which they were clearly winning. There's some better options here, particularly in the form of the Sentries of Alcolande and the Shoal Hunters. So hopefully we recognize that. Lost mic run them a little bit here, but we are going to regain it. And we're going to go right for the Sentries of Alcolande. Artorias sees it. He's going to try and cut me off there. Hunters of Caligorm somehow managing to maintain 13 models. Some support coming in from the Rangers of Hellevorn, going toe-to-toe with the Mariners of Alcolande. It's a fairly even fight there between those two medium infantry units, but ultimately I think the numbers and the just local superiority of Valinor will give them the edge needed to see their way through. Hunters of Caligorm going to basically just burst through the Sentries of Alcolande and charge headlong into these Shoal Hunters, and they are distracting quite a lot of missile units in the back here who are trying to deal damage to them. But from the front, my heavy lancers are doing pretty well. We're just going to pull them right through and attack from a fairly unexpected angle. I'm going to go for that nice hammer and anvil here. Just at the moment when the Fingolfin reinforcements arrive, Sentries of Hithlum here bringing their pikes to bear. Artorias will see this at the last minute, and my horsemen will get in there. Some of them just jumping right into the fray, getting surrounded, but it will turn the Peacekeepers of Valinor around for a while and deal a little bit of HP damage as well. In the back here, over on this side, things are going okay. My cavalry is starting to kind of give ground here, and most of them have been quite handily defeated. So they're basically going toe-to-toe with the Knights of Tirion here. There's not enough of them left to win this fight, but my hope is that they'll just keep this cavalry busy. They're also after some of the Shoal Hunters, managing to cut a number of them down, so maybe they'll keep the Knights of Tirion busy and take down some of their HPN models. They are still Feanor cavalry, so they will put up a good fight. Over here, Mount Company, they are technically losing, but against the Sentries of Alcolande, they will take a quite serious cost, and there's more Marines of Vinyamar and stuff like that over here. The Teleri are sort of winning, kind of, but now that the elite Noldor swordsmen have been brought to bear, the Hirumatar and the Armatar, they're actually going to blender through a lot of these light Teleri units. So they have the numbers, but they don't have the quality. Herdsmen of Hithlum over here. It's just been bloody in the center. Just absolute carnage and chaos. And there's many dead Teleri and many dead Edain as well. But it's sort of ongoing. The reinforcements have come in from both sides, and it's not clear yet who's going to win that. Over here, though, we are winning quite handily. Some reinforcements have come now to the aid of my Rangers of Hellevorn, and the Arimo Arantar have joined the fray. These Mariners of Alcolande are going to get routed off here, and they're going to go right through my Rangers of Hellevorn. This is the unit that we saw, I believe, rout off earlier, and now they have come back. They're going toe-to-toe with Peacekeepers of Valimar. The Mariners of Alcolande are going to rout right through them. They're going to get a little bit of well-deserved, I feel, revenge. Sentries of Hithlum moving in as well, and we're kind of well-poised to win in a couple of places. You can see some of the Teleri now beginning to break off, but a lot of the Valinor cavalry, at least the cavalry that remains, is now free, able to extricate themselves or shut down all threats, and those Knights of Tirion now are free to just do whatever they want to do. Most of the Wild Riders, however, have been defeated. And there's a smaller unit over here of sorry, my Lancers, my Hunters of Celegorm. And they're just continuing to be something of a nuisance, keep some of this cavalry busy. But we are, so we have a little bit of a breakthrough here? No, actually, I think that's the Herdsmen of Hithlum routing off under fire from the Shoal Hunters over there. But in the center, Valinor is actually being overrun, believe it or not. The numbers here have really begun to tell, and now, this is really significant. The Sons of Húrin in the center against a lot of these heavily armored units, they have what it takes to cut through the Valinor defenses. And over here, we're starting to win things back. So on the wings, we're actually well poised for victory. The Peacekeepers of Valimod here doing their best, but the Marines of Vinyamar have the numbers, and they do have the ability to surround these spearmen, and that'll basically be it for them. Some of these Marines of Vinyamar getting a little bit far out, but they will get turned around, and they're going to charge, I believe, into the rear of some of the sentries. What remains of my mounted company doing what they can to keep these missile units busy, while the Marines of Vinyamar try and do their work. Let's see, I don't think I have any cavalry left to speak of. Knights of Tedion have been sufficiently weakened. Looks like Scouts is trying to move some of his peacekeepers over to maybe support them or to flank with them, but they're kind of spread out all over the place. This is a very chaotic formation. Over here, sentries and rangers have broken off from the fight in order to make sure that these Shoal Hunters do indeed stay gone, but we will start to turn them around fairly shortly, and these Shoal Hunters will have an opportunity to regroup, so we are going to see them come back again. Meanwhile, in the center, my Footmen of Amaras have just done a mighty job. It's quite amazing that there's any of them left here, but it really does speak to Valinor's lack of ability to counter armor with some of their more important damaging mainline units. Some cavalry now behind. Bilbo's going to see it. He's going to turn around with the Armitar, and that is mostly going to bounce off of those elite swordsmen. Over here, Wild Riders, perhaps flying a little too close to the sun. The second those pikes turn around, these units are going to get absolutely annihilated. And indeed they have, and they're going to begin that push, and now some of the Marines of Vinyamar looking like they're going to pin what remains of those Wild Riders in place. Artorius is going to pull out the Knights of Tedion, but the Wild Riders here basically are just food for the meat grinder, and they would be just walked through by those pikemen. The Rangers of Helivorn here are going to take that on the chin. They don't like it. It hurts. They still have some ammunition, so this is probably a good idea. They were trying to target down the Knights of Tedion, but they were a little bit too slow on the uptick. Now those Knights of Tedion are going to have the opportunity to flee. What remains of my Rangers of Helivorn, ooh, actually going to take down one of those models. One of those Knights of Tedion felled by a member of House Beor, one of the Rangers of Helivorn. And the Shoal Runners are going to turn around and try and finish off these units. But I'm going to see it. I'm going to countercharge. And the men of House Beor are not going to go quietly into that good night. Looks like they're actually going to be completely ignored. And instead they're going to go for maybe for a cheeky rear charge, but it's not going to be a good idea. There are a unit of sentries in the way. And they're going to just sort of run through my infantry here. My infantry are going to be able to claim a few more lives of some of these horsemen. But they are not too long for this world. Peacekeepers of Valimod from Scouts of Entertainment now on a flanking mission in behind the centers of Hithlum. Over here, my Footmen of Amaras, I sort of gave them a move command to try and get through the Shoal Hunters so that we could surround them and maybe rout them off, but it's actually not working out very well for me. And ultimately, I think it's getting more of them killed than needs to. This is actually a successful little hammer and anvil here. You can see sort of the difference between units turning around and units just not doing that, and a lot of damage can be done here to these sentries of Hithlum. Let's go ahead and turn things up just a little bit. They will claim a few of those models. I think the intention there was to try and rout them, but they're not quite at that point yet, so it ended up being a bit of a futile gesture. That's Tedion over here. There's a second unit of them alongside the Shoal Hunters. These two units could potentially cause some problems if they manage to get in behind, say the sentries, for example. But over on the front line, oh yeah, nice charge there. It's actually going to hurt the sentries of Hithlum quite a lot, but it is going to cost them. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 or 6 models maybe. They're killed off from the Knights of Tedion to show how powerful pikes can be against cavalry, as it should be. These are the Knights of Tedion here from Artorias. We go for another cheeky charge here, and this one will actually pay off. It is going to cost a few more models. A follow-up charge there is going to be enough to break those sentries. So there are tactics available. Nice teamwork there from Artorias and scouts. Going to be enough to rout off that unit of pikemen, but it was costly. Did take down quite a number of those expensive models, and it can be hard for Valinor to win fights in that sort of situation. Meanwhile, over here, the lines have shifted again. Another unfortunate charge here from Artorias into the front of these pikemen. They're trying to replicate the success that they just had, but it's not going to work out terribly well. Shoal hunters are basically going to get destroyed here, and more sentries are moving in, so they're going to be facing 2 units here instead of just the regular one. My general is going to go down, but that's alright, because most of my stuff is already dead. This is really down to Bilbo here. I have like a handful of my Angry Lobster men, and yeah, what I have left doesn't really represent much of our fighting strength. Armitar and Harumatar charging into battle here, getting rear charged in turn by the Knights of Tedion. Idimo Adentar, however, are nearby, and a lot of these units should hopefully stabilize with the presence of the High King bolstering their courage. Mariners of Alcorlande returning to the fight. And I think the Shoal Hunters will be coming back as well. I'm trying to bring back the small unit of Rangers of Helleborn that I do still have. Some Shoal Hunters, though. It's bad news bears for us. Don't want those Shoal Hunters breaking the morale of what is majoritarily an Edain force remaining at this point. And if they have any ammunition, well, that can be a big problem as well. Out in the back here, it looks like some of these Fyrdsmen have chased, or been chased by, a unit of Hearthguard of Tirion. So there's a tiny little fight going on out here, which the Hearthguard are sure to win, but it will keep them out of the fight for an extended period. There are some really good melee defense units on spear, or melee defense stats on spears. Kinsmen of Ingwe trying to pull their way through. Bilbo very wisely reinforcing some important parts of his line. Marines of Vinyamar over here as well, charging in to the flank of some of the sentries and the peacekeepers. There are some Shoal Hunters nearby, which could cause a bit of a rout. That would be bad news bears. Luckily, there's not enough of them to be a genuine threat, although at this late stage in the game, if given time, it will start to deal some pretty significant damage. And the Marines of Vinyamar already thinking about maybe running away. And with a little rear charge with the presence of those cavalry, this could be enough to send them fleeing. Yeah, and here come the cavalry. Artorias lining it up for a little bit of a rout there. And the Marines of Vinyamar are actually going to flee right through the enemy troops. It's bad news bears. Sons of Húrin here, getting rear charged. Those Knights of Tirion don't want to stick around in there for too long. One of those sons managed to hit them. It would be very, very bad indeed. Luckily, though, this pocket of resistance has been defeated, and now there are some reinforcements just in the nick of time, including the High King himself. That's going to be enough to send the Shoal Hunters here into a panic, which is going to then isolate what remains of these Valinor elites, pinned between some Sons of Húrin and some vengeful reinforcing units, and the Sentries of Hithlum setting themselves up here to prevent the meager force of Knights of Tirion from having any further impact in the battle. Meanwhile, over here, Team Red and Blue squaring off against a mix of Peacekeepers of Valimar and some Mariners of Aquilande, who are rethinking their life choices. Might not see too much of them for the next little while. My footmen just barely managing to hold on here, fighting shoulder to shoulder with some of the veteran swordsmen of House Fingolfin. Two factions with traditionally very tense relationships, shall we say. Fighting side by side here, and it is actually paying off. The death of one of the generals there to, I believe, the Sons of Húrin is enough to send some of these units into a panic, and down goes another Valinor general, and this is where we're going to see the routes happen. Mariners of Aquilande breaking off. The Peacekeepers of Valimar, even with the high morale that they do have, the 20 morale, kind of thinking about maybe running away. And if we look at the percentages here, very devastating. 92 to 92. Basically dead on even. But these Peacekeepers are going to break now that their general has been slain. And over here, what remains of these Peacekeepers of Valinor are not too long for this world. So we're going to go ahead, kick that into full speed. Let's see how it goes. And off they run. The Peacekeepers fleeing for the hills, fleeing for their ships back to the Blessed Realm. And that was a damn close game. Really came down to Fingolfin and their comp being fantastic. And I think one of the big decisive moments was how much ammunition it took from the Valinor faction in order to get rid of just a couple of units of light infantry. Ah, how embarrassing. My hard drive for recording ran out of space. As I was saying, I think one of the big decisive kind of moments in this was, well, there's a few things. One, we were really able to efficiently deal with the Valinor cavalry. By the time they were managed to get behind our lines, I mean, they had like a ragtag band. There was one fairly sizable unit of the Knights of Tedion, which was obviously a problem, and some teamwork there between Scouts and Artorias managed to rout off a full unit of pikes nearly, which was fantabulous. However, there were some not great engagements. We did manage to take down the shoal, like half the shoal runners on their side almost right off the get-go, which was unfortunate. And then there were some not amazing engagements taken by the Wild Riders. They were exposed to a lot of missiles, and those kind of frontal charges wasn't necessarily the best thing to do at the time. And then there was the Wild Riders who went toe-to-toe with our mounted company of Kudufin, and that's not going to be a great fight for the Wild Riders. Even with the support there, we just had the local superiority, we had more numbers, we had basically everything we needed there, and those Wild Riders were kind of left in. I definitely made a mistake with throwing in some of my mounted company into the spear units, but we did manage to pull them out and use them to tie down some skirmishers a little bit later. And it did also keep at least 2 units of skirmishers busy and kind of chunk through their numbers a little bit. Yeah, so the cavalry was part of it, and the other thing was using a lot of ammunition, as I was saying, on just a couple of units of light infantry. Each of those slingers only has about 8 shots in the whole unit, so 8 shots per individual model, and using them on those light infantry to the extent that they did, or using them against my fully armored and upgraded Footmen of Amaras, which basically did nothing, it just bounced off of them, was not the most efficient use of the ammunition. So I think that between some of the mismanagement of the cavalry and not the greatest use of all of their skirmishers, there were some great uses of them. Getting a lot of the herdsmen, for example, punishing Bilbo for those positioning mistakes was really good. But ultimately, I don't think that their ammunition was used to the greatest extent, and Artorias brought a mostly skirmish army. But I don't think he really had the ability to keep it under control, which is why we were able to catch those shoal runners basically early on, and kill off a full half of them. So 2 units basically crippled, or outright destroyed, and then the other ones had some light casualties as well. So, yeah, that, and I think it really did show off some of the prominent weaknesses of the Valinor faction. The Teleri obviously are the soft underbelly. They didn't do amazing. They did pretty well in the skirmishing phase and the support phase, yeah, sure, but they just didn't have the chops for that sort of prolonged engagement that a lot of the other factions' infantry units do. And then it really came down to the proliferation of shoal runners and sentries of Alcolonde, and they're just not melee units. They don't have great morale response. Very easy to make them run away, and their stats are just not well suited for close quarters. So I think between our good use of cavalry, Bilbo's fantastic use of his army, just bringing the right units into the right places at the right time, really just made this victory possible. So yeah, all those factors I think contributed to our victory here. It was still very close. Came down to a few percentage points, but yeah, really good game. So let's take a look at what did what in my army. So some of my footmen did really well, others didn't do so well, but really their job was just to kind of be there and hold the line. So between them, they got, around 300 or so kills. Not bad. My Shield Bearers of Helivorn did extremely poorly. They're basically decimated by concentrated skirmish fire, which, yeah, 3 or 4 units shooting at one unit, it's going to be really ugly. Our Rangers of Helivorn did okay in some instances, but this also doesn't attribute HP damage that they did on some of the chunkier units. We did manage to get a little bit of enfilading fire. Might have missed that during the replay, but there was some enfilading fire into that blob of Valinor infantry on our sort of left wing, closer to the center. That did help weaken them a little bit, and ultimately they did all right. Riders of the Pass, 59 and 69 respectively. Not the worst. Probably didn't pay for themselves, but ultimately they were very useful for dealing some extra HP damage, weakening units, and just kind of keeping them on their toes. And that's something that kills don't necessarily account for, is that sort of HP damage, or like the psychological damage that comes with having all of this extra cavalry, and you know what you can do and what you can force people to do positionally. So that's something. Mounted Company of Kurufin did extremely well. One of them got nearly 200 kills. And this is where a lot of the killing power of our army was anyway. Yeah, really impressed with their performance all across the line. Our Hunters of Caligorm actually didn't do too bad. 95 and 78, they were under a lot of pressure, and they managed to take down quite a lot of cavalry in particular, which are low model, so that's useful. And caused a little bit of terror and some routing and like weakening the Teleri units in certain areas that allowed us to kind of pull things back a little bit with our own infantry. So yeah, really good game. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I was really happy to be able to show this off to you. I know Valinor won, and I was talking about how good Valinor was, but I think you can see it in this, right? Like, I'm an experienced player, and Bilbo isn't like bad by any means. He's still a little bit newer, I think, but he's quite good, and his army was good, and there were some big mistakes made on the Valinor side, but it still managed to kind of get to that sweet spot where it's like, you know, 3 to 5%. So yeah, it was really good. Scouts as well, I think, was a little bit new to the faction, but Artorias does know how to play them. So it was a nice even game, and next one I show you will be another Valinor game. So hope you guys enjoy this, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye!